Searching the Supernatural. And Merry Christmas. This episode will touch upon a very, very likely candidate for the famous Star of Bethlehem, mentioned in Matthew's New Testament Gospel concerning the account of Jesus' birth, that a very bright star announced the birth of Christ and caught the attention of Magi from the east who traveled to Jerusalem and ultimately to Bethlehem to visit the newborn king. The Star of Bethlehem has been a source of confusion for historians. They don't know what it was. Chinese astronomers never documented a cometary visit during those years, nor did they document a supernova that could have been the Star of Bethlehem. Messianic expectations at that time were high. The entire territory of Galilee and Judea were under occupation by the Romans, and the Romans were oppressive with their taxation, and to be a tax collector during that era was to be the worst trader imaginable. They just pillaged whatever area they occupied, considering everything theirs. So the Jews were hoping for a king, a deliverer, who would rise up and overthrow the Roman occupiers, and possibly even appoint Israel as a world leader and capital of the world. And such a leader that would do this would be a primarily political figure that they called the Messiah, the son of David, David being the greatest king of Israel ever recorded. And this isn't all that horribly long after the Maccabees liberated Israel from oppression during a celebration that they commemorated and that we now understand as Hanukkah. So, they were waiting for a deliverer, they were crying for a deliverer. According to Josephus, the first century Roman Jewish historian, King Herod died in 4 BC, 2 weeks after a prominent lunar eclipse. Now there may be an issue with Josephus in this 4 BC dating. Herod's death is instrumental in dating the birth of Jesus because Herod was alive when Jesus was born, and the paranoid Herod, who was paranoid, and we know this through the writings of Josephus, was afraid that people were going to anoint or crown a newborn king at that time. Thus he sent soldiers to slaughter all the male infants shortly after the Magi visited looking for the newborn king. Josephus wrote that King Herod died shortly after a lunar eclipse, 2 weeks after, and people place this lunar eclipse during 4 BC, which is before Christ. And yes, I am using that outdated system of BC and AD. So, scholars, biblical researchers, they all look for the Star of Bethlehem as occurring well before 4 BC. So it could conform to this idea that Herod died in 4 BC. But Josephus may have been in error. And there were other prominent lunar eclipses, including one that occurred in 1 BC. Ernest Martin, in his book The Star That Astonished the World, hypothesized that Herod in fact died in 1 BC. And if this happens, this opens up a huge possibility for the Star of Bethlehem. The planets Venus and the planets Jupiter are the brightest stars that we can see with the naked eye. Technically they're not stars, but I'm using the term stars as a visual reference because most people who don't know astronomy, they look up and go, my, what's that bright star? They don't know it's a planet, right? Venus and Jupiter are the 2 brightest astronomical bodies that we can see in the sky other than the moon and the sun. Now imagine that the 2 brightest stars that we can see came together to form a single solitary star. Now that is dramatic. It's dramatic and rare. Now, Venus and Jupiter passed so close together, they formed a tight figure 8. And ironically, through our Greek designations and our Roman designations for these planets, Jupiter is the king planet, Jupiter being the king of gods, like Zeus, and Venus is the young maiden. One could say the king being born of the young maiden. And what constellation did they come together in? In the constellation Leo. And who was the Messiah to be in Judaic prophecy? The Messiah was to be the Lion of Judea. Leo the lion being the constellation, where the young maiden gives birth to a king. The Book of Revelation. Chapter 12, verses 1 through 6, speak of a heavenly woman clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet, and she is about to give birth, but there is a great red dragon seeking to destroy this event. Now this vision reflects on the past. John the Revelator, or whoever wrote down the vision, is reflecting on the past, when the Virgin Mary gave birth to the Christ child, Herod the Great, which was inspired by the great red dragon, being Satan, to destroy and murder the Christ child. So why does this vision symbolize the birth of Christ? Because this is an actual, traceable, astronomical formation that can be traced onto a sacred Jewish holiday, just as when Jesus was sacrificed on Passover, a Jewish holiday, as the Passover lamb without sin. He was born on a Jewish holiday, or he was conceived on a Jewish holiday. There are two different theories, and that Jewish holiday is Rosh Hashanah, 3 BC. September 11th, 3 BC. Rosh Hashanah being the Jewish New Year. On the Jewish New Year, 3 BC, the constellation Virgo had the sun positioned in her middle, and the new moon was positioned at her feet, just as the vision described in the book of Revelation, with a great red dragon posed to devour them, that being Herod the Great. Author Ernest Martin, who first proposed the Venus-Jupiter conjunction as the actual Star of Bethlehem, hypothesized that September 11th, 3 BC was the actual birth date of Christ, the actual Christmas, and that 9 months later, Jupiter and Venus came together as the Star of Bethlehem, which then inspired the Magi to travel and to visit Judea looking for the newborn king. And that would have occurred many months later, and by the time they reached Judea, Jesus was already a young toddler, no longer a babe in a manger. Now, lawyer Frederick Larson put together a presentation he called The Star of Bethlehem, and it's a very popular documentary and DVD, and I recommend strongly that everyone watch this. He proposed that September 11th, 3 BC, Rosh Hashanah, represented the conception rather than the birth of Jesus. And in this manner, Jupiter and Venus came together over the actual nativity scene, the Star of Bethlehem shining brightly at the birth of Christ during July of 2 BC. Sometime after this, Jupiter continued along its path, only to enter retrograde motion months later over the town of Bethlehem, which indicated to the Magi, who were sparked on their journey by the conjunction of Jupiter and Venus, to continue to follow the planet Jupiter. And when Jupiter entered retrograde motion, they were in Jerusalem, and from their vantage point, the star stopped over the town of Bethlehem. And the town of Bethlehem was prophesied to be the birthplace of the Messiah, the son of David, since David himself was from Bethlehem. Frederick Larson went on to expand on this theory that July of 2 BC is the actual Christmas, unless you want to count Christmas as when the Magi brought their gifts, and that actually occurred on December 25th of 2 BC. Ironically, yes, December 25th is when the planet Jupiter stopped over the town of Bethlehem to enter retrograde motion. So, I think Frederick Larson's theory actually is a bit more compelling than Ernest Martin's, where the vision seen in Revelation is announcing the conception rather than the birth of Jesus. When one traces Jesus' life in the traditional 33 years, winding down towards his 34th birthday, which doesn't occur, Jesus is crucified during the year 33 AD. So what's significant about the year 33 AD? Well, on Passover of that year, there was a lunar eclipse. And strangely enough, the moon entered total eclipse right at the time of Jesus' reported death, 3 p.m. on April 3rd, 33 AD. Now, this occurred before the moon was visible in Judea, but as the moon rose on the horizon, the moon was still capped in the Earth's shadow, creating a red area on the moon. They call that a blood moon. When the moon is in the Earth's shadow, it can appear red as blood, thus the term blood moon. And guess where the moon was on April 3rd, AD 33? Yup, the moon was again at the feet of Virgo, the constellation which was representing the virginal maiden. Wow. I mean, how many coincidences can occur here, right? I mean, this is beyond coincidence. So, when the Jews, after the events of the crucifixion, saw a blood moon rising on the horizon that evening at the foot of Virgo the Virgin, that must have been something for them. So, Frederick Larson, in his wonderful presentation, calls this the Starry Dance. It's an astronomical dance that marks the significant events of Jesus of Nazareth and his life, starting with his conception on Rosh Hashanah, the dramatic planetary conjunction during his birth in July 2 BC, and the lunar eclipse at the foot of the Virgin during his death in 33 AD. Just amazing, just incredible. And this, no doubt, is the Star of Bethlehem that Matthew's Gospel account refers to. Now, why did scholars ignore all this? Well, because they were married to this idea that Josephus recorded that Herod died before 4 BC. Well, I'm willing to readjust Josephus's account here, because the evidence is too strong. When the church fathers were calculating when Jesus was born, they weren't that far off. 2 BC is almost on target. Thank you very much. Please like, subscribe, and comment on the video. More to come.